Hey everyone, so this is the first Techie Green Room how-to video. And the first thing that I was building was for High School Musical. It was some platforms, but we decided that we had some risers that we use for other events, and we are limited on our storage space. So I decided to build frames for those riser platforms, so we could just use those as our second level on our set rather than having to buy lots and lots of sheet lumber, which is the 4x8 sheets, just because we couldn't store them very well. That way, when we take it apart, there's just a little less lumber to have to figure out where to put. Um, so this first how-to video is a little more pictures than video. So let's get started on the first picture. The first picture is just of some of them that are completed. I did this in two different sizes. These in this picture are a 4x8, which is two of our risers put together. But I found it was going to be easier to build them in bigger sections than a whole bunch of little ones. And that also attributes to their stability. The smaller and the more numerous your platforms are, the more weak spots you have because there's so many joints that you have to worry about. Where if you've got straight lumber that spans longer distances, it's a bit stronger and you don't have to worry about quite as much support underneath. So as we move to the second image, here's one of the 4x4 foot versions. Same basic design, but just a little smaller because we had a balcony that sat over the front part of it, and it was easier to just sort of do it in two sections for us, but it easily could have done one bigger one as well. But I made sure I supported it well underneath so that it wasn't going to cave in on itself. And I can talk about that later. So I started with 1x6 pine. It just seems like a good framing lumber for this. It was nice and deep because I had to make that shelf inside to hold the platform. My platforms were about 1.5 inches thick, so I needed to make sure I had 1.5 inches of depth, plus whatever I was using on the inside for that shelf, and then some underneath of that shelf to attach the 4x4 posts that I put underneath as the structure to hold it up in the air. So the pile you see right now is just some of the scraps towards the end of the build. I was using these scraps to build the 4x4s, so that I used up all of my lumber as much as possible. The next picture is the pieces that I cut for those corner brackets that you saw earlier inside to sort of help keep it at right angles. So I cut each end off at 45 degrees. Your distance isn't a huge factor. I think I made mine about 15 inches long. But that way you have some support in the corners as well. And I lined them right up to the shelf, so it kind of helped add support for the platforms as they came in a little later. And then this is just me drilling in the holes, pre-drilling the holes for the screws, just so that I don't run into any split wood issues. I pre-drill sometimes, I don't other times. It's really more your preference, but I find on small lumber like this, I'd rather take that extra step and pre-drill rather than having to cut again. So there they are with the holes already drilled on either side, ready to go. Next, for the pieces for the framing, I had to mark out where my shelf was going to sit, so that 1.5 inch shelf that was going to be around the whole thing. So I make sure I measured that out, and then I drew the straight line all the way across, and then I also made sure that I left like about 3/4 of an inch, which is the thickness of the wood, on either end, so that I made sure that the inside dimensions of my platform were a total of 4 feet. Always make sure that your dimensions work. I think the biggest mistake usually is that you don't compensate for the thickness of the wood. So you either end up with something that's too big or something that's too small because it cuts into what you need. So always when you're cutting, make sure you compensate for that extra bit of thickness. So there it is. There are my lines. And there's my 1.5 inch depth. The next image that you see is the shelf. So I just used basic furring strips. They're really cheap. And I screwed them in across that line. And they just acted as the edge shelving around the whole thing. And the hole I'll talk about in a minute. In the middle there is where I put a middle brace for the middle support beam. But we'll talk about that in a second because it had to be adjusted. But that is just so I can make sure that it's nice and sturdy in there and ready to go. So there they are. They're all ready to go. Make sure your measurements are the same on all of them so that your holes line up. So here is a corner. They come together. Mine aren't exactly perfect, but they're close. Again, make sure you compensate for that dimension inside as well, so that they can butt up right against each other, and you don't have huge gaps. And there's the screws holding it all together. I did pre-drill these as well, especially when it's small, thin wood. I like to pre-drill. All right, so this image is me cutting down one of these 1x6s by that 1.5 inch to make that center support brace. It can't be the same height as the outside ones because then you couldn't put the platform in. So I had to cut it so it matched the height of the support, and then install it on the sides. And then as you move forward, you'll want to make sure that everything is squared up and make sure all of your angles are at 90 degrees as you attach everything so that later when you come in, the piece that I was putting in drops in nice and smooth because it's all lined up. And there's the corner bracket in place to sort of give extra support. Showing you back to the picture with the full platform on the ground, you can see there's the center support brace cut down to the right height of the inner ring so that the platform can sit right on top of it. And this picture is of it in its place. Everything dropped in pretty nicely. I had to do a little bit of adjustment since I built off-site and I didn't have the platforms in front of me, but for the most part, everything just sort of plopped into place. But really, those right angles are crucial to making sure these all fit and drop in nicely. But it's all, everything is screwed together, bolted together. I added a little bit of depth and dimension with the wood because they were too butted up against each other, and even I forgot to compensate, but it was really an 1.5 inch difference, and it didn't make too much of a big deal for me. But there you have it. That's building a frame for pre-existing platforms. I'm sure a lot of schools and things have these, so it's kind of a nice way to use what you've already got, not have to worry about bringing in extra lumber. Not everyone has the ability to move large pieces of lumber around, as I'm learning here on Nantucket when we're dealing with lumber companies, not just Home Depot, and everything comes in 16-foot lengths. It's a little more difficult to schlep things around. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'm happy to help. Things hopefully will get better as we go. I'll start taking some videos of things I'm building. The show is up and running. We've got a couple more this week, but everything is strong and sturdy and holding up. And our next show is Diary of Anne Frank, and I am sure I will have tons of things to talk about from that show. There's tons of set pieces and things going on. So if you've done Diary of Anne Frank, let me know, and I'd be happy to hear from you and see what's going on and what you guys did to make the world of Anne Frank come alive. So thanks for listening, and I hope this was helpful. Thanks. Bye.